Well, let me ask this question. A lot of founders talk about, their early days and getting that sort of hockey stick-like growth. This was not like Airbnb's founder talks about, it was an overnight success that took, 4 years. What was the inflection point for Vercel? When did you start to see things really starting to work, and what would you attribute to that sort of change?
Yeah, nowadays we call this magical thing that became the inflection point of Vercel, framework-defined infrastructure. And it's interesting because our CTO was here today, Mount, and I kind of had to reverse engineer our success in many ways. We're okay, how did we get here? How are we growing so fast? Things are working well. How would you explain the combination of this framework that we created and the 35 plus frameworks that we support, Next.js, plus our infrastructure? How are they cooperating? And so what we figured out in a nutshell is this idea of give the customer the boundaries of your software. In this case, the front-end framework that we created, Next.js, but other frameworks that we support, and then create this almost cloud compiler that turns the application source into an intermediate representation that then becomes the infrastructure. And this was not just so that we could make serverless easy and fix a lot of problems with serverless. So when you think about serverless from our view of the world, it was always that perpetual dream that everyone wanted to get to, but there were a lot of obvious obstacles. For example, one was local development. Actually, not too long ago, tried to do local development the raw big cloud primitives of serverless, and basically it took me 45 minutes of actually downloading Docker containers to spin up some simulation of the cloud, and I was holy crap, I'm glad we exist. It was that moment that founders sometimes have, I'm glad I'm doing something here. So local development was fraught with issues.
There's that meme that says, it works on my laptop. And then Very trying students, he says...
It's the opposite with serverless. It ostensibly worked in the cloud.
Right. Docker is that we shipped your laptop to
Yes. And so that was also very heavy. We tried that. So we tried the whole simulate the entirety of the operating system that's running in the cloud and everything about the environment and whatever. So there were all these developer experience issues, but then there were also how do you map the application that ultimately the product engineering is working on to globally distributed infrastructure. And that really was a very challenging problem. And so the solution that we provided was twofold, and this is where I always encourage entrepreneurs to not just think about developer experience, because that can be a local maxima. We solved for the developer experience, and we also solved for something very enticing, which was to actually make the application faster. So in a nutshell, and obviously the reality of the real world is more complex than this, but what it allowed us to do was I can go to the VP, the CTO, the person that just wants a fast website that doesn't crash it in Black Friday, and I could tell them that's the value prop of Vercel. And simultaneously, I can go to the developer and say, oh, and your life just became a lot easier. I talked to one such developer at a very large corporation today about this, and he was almost physically ill when describing the current infra and the homegrown frameworks and the homegrown infrastructure. So because we had that two-pronged approach to the market, that was the unlocker for us.
So you and I were talking, Ian, just before we came in here about, the philosophies of no code, low code versus code-fault architectures, frameworks. How has Vercel thought about that? What's your perspective on this, today, looking at this from the lens of 2023?
Yeah, this is a great question, which was prompted by an observation that when I went to the Rill data landing page, I loved that it said that all my BI dashboards are the output of code, and my framework-defined infrastructure brain immediately kicks off, oh, I can use Rill as a framework. I can push it up to the cloud. It defines some really cool views of my data, which is connected already to all my data integrations. Maybe I'm butchering your pitch.
No, we're going to put you in product marketing.
Right. Put me in.
A GPT-4 app that will code.
And obviously, I like it because it resonates with our story. So local dev is really important, but even more important, I call this the unreasonable effectiveness of hyperlinks. Even more important is that for any atomic unit of work that you do on a day-to-day basis, this is like a fundamental principle of mine, you should have a hyperlink that you can share. So if I make a fix to a front end, I should have an ephemeral link to that preview URL that I can share. A lot of companies whose success we might take for granted basically are glorified hyperlink collaboration systems on top of more boring infrastructure. GitHub, here's the PR, hyperlink to GitHub or Git storage/hosting. Figma for design files, Vercel for front-end deployments, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm glad to hear that someone is doing this for BI as well. So on low-code and no-code, whenever I would explain the value prop of Vercel in terms of increasing your iteration velocity, making your operations really lean, folks would almost immediately react with, oh, so it's a low-code and no-code platform. And that's like, for a founder, it's also bad when like someone kind of gets you, but then they like stab you with a comment like that. It's like, oh, no. And this is also something that I credit Malte with, is that he would respond to this question with, no, we love code. We're the opposite. Like, just make it really clear that we love code, but we're almost taking away the bad parts. And I respect the folks that kind of like really try to make no code and low code work, because it's almost like the OG serverless. It's almost like an opinionated runtime that's running in the cloud, for which they define very sharp corners and boundaries that then they could reason about that scale that I wanted as well. So it's almost like a low code and no code system gets that for free because it's so limited. And here's where all the amazing evolutions that have happened in the world of virtualized compute have helped Vercel. Obviously, things like Firecracker, where I can now expand the boundary of my runtime. I can now give you a much bigger playing field for Turing complete infinity of logic, right? So bringing it back, I think the fact that we made code get some of those properties of no-code and low-code systems gives us the entry point is very low. Literally, my wife today deployed her website on Vercel, and she's never written a line of code. And I can then take the same system and sell it to folks that now during Black Friday are going to do tens of billions of requests per week. So that's the other property that I think if you're not thought deeply about that serverless scalability system, you might end up either too far on the one side of the spectrum, which reshapes your growth strategy. If we wanted to be PLG, we also needed to have that property of like this 0 to 1 is very, very fast and cost efficient.
I think I've heard that, one of the reasons why The Simpsons is such a popular show is that their humor works on many levels. But clearly, great products work for many personas. And what I see in the evolution of Vercel is you have made it more accessible to folks like your wife, but clearly there's still a billboard, on the 101 that has an end command that is not designed.
A BMI AI. Yeah, we'll make it easy. We'll make it easy to add AI over time.
So let's talk about AI a little bit here. And you and I spoke, I think on Twitter a few weeks ago. One of the folks I had at the Data Talks on the Rocks in New York City was Ito Liberty, founder of Pinecone, and you had mentioned that you're doing more and more work with vector databases. We've got Simon here from TroubleBuffer, who made an appearance working on a serverless vector database. Maybe two questions. One specifically to AI. We think of Vercel as a place where people can build, create, publish applications, but ultimately these applications need to talk to infrastructure. AI, of course, comes to mind where we need to be able to pull these vector embeddings back. How is Vercel working in the AI context with stateful infrastructure like Pinecone and maybe in the future others that are here, and then more broadly that other stateful infrastructure out there?
Yeah, when I explain our contributions to the AI landscape, they are on two levels. One is that we want to continue to lower the barrier of entry to creating on the Vercel platform. And I think a lot of great companies have been on a journey similar to ours, where Bill Gates started with a basic compiler, and then he created Windows, which can have reservations about, but he reached a huge number of people. Our contribution there is V0. It's this text to generative UI program. You enter some English text prompts, and we give you working React code that you can throw into your project to make a UI very, very simply. So this is one of those technologies that I think with AI we're just going to broaden access to creation. I hear from a lot of folks that do backend that they still cannot center a div in 2023. So with V0, you can say, hey, create a rectangle that is centered in the middle of the screen.
Does the center tag work just as well?
I wish, but you can tell V0, please center it, and it'll do it. So that's kind of like the whole like lower the barrier entry thing, which is huge for us. And also even make the existing engineers, even the pros, more efficient. The other level is what you're talking about, which is providing the infrastructure to create AI native products. And I'm really big on this because I think that we can now speak of the cloud in two chapters. Cloud 1.0, Cloud 2.0. The stack of Cloud 1.0 is the things that we know really well now. We've been the dead horse of object storage, RDS, SQS, SNS, EC2. Like every cloud vendor has created a version of these primitives. They've become the standard building blocks. Going back to that compiler idea, it's like the instruction set of the cloud. It's like the things that you output out to use this cloud computer. Now I think we're seeing this Cloud 2.0, which introduces new instructions, new primitives. We have the vector database as one such primitive. I also think it elevates the importance of certain primitives that are over in Cloud 1.0. For example, on the Vercel side, we've gotten really good at streaming user interfaces. We can server render, and then we can stream as the data and the rendering of that data becomes available to create the smoothest possible web experiences. Turns out it's very necessary in the world of AI, where you have these machines that are thinking and they take their time to output their thoughts. So to create a very slick UI, you need a web infrastructure such as Vercel. But you also have the introduction of these things that it almost seemed like previously they didn't exist or they weren't as widely distributed. And those are the vector database, of course, the LLM. And now we're seeing, I think, even higher level services come to market, like the Assistant API. Even services that aggregate some of those primitives and then make them more attractive to developers. And that's the area where Vercel is very interested in investing. Can I give you very simple APIs to leverage AI without having to understand too deeply all the nuances of, how all the systems need to connect together, which are pretty difficult engineering challenges, right? Like you have an unreliable LLM, you have to try to capture that craziness that's going on. You might have to retry it. The services themselves are unreliable. You might have to do failover. So simplifying that whole landscape of Cloud 2.0 and making it really easy for developers to create these AI products.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a quick question and then two final ones, but I'll ask them a quick question, which is, we've seen here in Silicon Valley investors lining up on both sides of this AI debate, open versus closed, regulated versus unregulated. Where does Guillermo stand on these questions of open versus closed models, open source models, foundation models? And secondly, whether or not, I think I know the answer to this, whether or not we should regulate these stochastic parrots.
Okay, so on the first one, I like that little bit is why not both? Because right now it's obvious that some of the proprietary systems have strong reasoning advantages that are undeniable. And you might want to build an application that needs very general, very powerful reasoning and conversational skills. However, that's not the case for every single application. So what we're seeing with our developer audience is when they don't need that pinnacle of reasoning performance, they go open source all the way. Why? It makes the most business sense. It makes the most sense from a community and ecosystem perspective. We're even talking to chip manufacturers that are creating new kinds of chip accelerators for LLMs. And what are they testing against? They're testing against whatever is available. And what is available? Llama and Mistral. So I think the tailwinds of how fast open source can evolve and get better, and the rate at which it can get better, cannot be underestimated. And I think that's what over time makes me extremely bullish about open source LLMs.
For a minute, and then, sorry, the second question is regulation.
On regulation, I'd say it's very clear to me that AI, when misused, can present dangers to society, very much like every other disruptive technology. But I'm very much pro, like, let's get this technology in the hands of everyone, because the good guys will vastly outnumber the bad guys. I actually talked to a founder yesterday who was building an AI firewall, inspired by the concept of when you think about Vercel as a multi-tier system, the ingress layer first applies the WAF, or first of all, like TCP UDP termination, TLS, DDoS mitigation, then web application firewall, then routing, right? So you have all these layers. And I think what we're going to see is folks adding layers that you can sort of slot in to these LLMs to make them more predictable, to make them safe, to make them safer, to detect potential attacks from the end user. It's actually fascinating to keep track of this, because just like when we had the land stack, people started figuring out, oh my God, little Bobby tables. I can seeking an SQL injection.
Didn't you get in some trouble lately for a demo that was widely ridiculed for an SQL injection?
Even though it was super safe, I was like the directness, like extremely safe. But people are now correctly, and by the way, I love this. We lived and we learned. Or I think hopefully most of us lived and learned, and we identified all these categories of attacks of the Cloud 1.0 stack, XSS, all kinds of cookie issues and third-party cookie issues, SQL injections. I think we're now finding out which ones of these apply to AI models. Like the other day, I was blown away when I saw the attack on GPT-4 Vision, where you can naively paste a screenshot that has very dim text. The dim text that you cannot see, the AI can see. So it creates a prompt injection. Now we're connecting these things to the internet. So I'm actually not as worried about the whole like AI will kill humanity. I'm more worried about like, holy crap, this opened up the consideration set of all these possible attack vectors, and there's no mature cybersecurity industry to create all the guardrails. But I'm talking more like don't get pwned and users not getting pwned. And certainly Xi Jinping and Joe Biden will not give us the recipe for like mitigating these attacks, right? Like, so we are the ones that we have to have all the AI tools in our hands to create this mitigation, to create the frameworks, to create the security solutions. That's what I'm excited about.
It's a great point. Last question before I call up Ryan, which would be, I know, I follow you on Twitter. That's how we got you to come here tonight. A lot of folks are here because of Twitter. I should say X. Sorry for the folks upstairs. Thank you, Alex. Keep my brand. You follow a lot of new technologies, new frameworks, new tools. A lot of people here are working on new frameworks and new tools. What are you most excited about right now? Not to play favorites, but what comes to top of mind for a few tools and technologies that you're paying attention to that you're checking out?
Yeah, so one potentially controversial thought that I have is folks might have over-indexed a little bit on like foundation models and not enough on what we can do with them. So I actually encourage the experimentation, the GPT wrapping, and I'm always blown away by how many successful businesses are being created in very specific verticals. So if I have to solve problems for folks editing video, editing podcasts, asking financial questions, support, even at Vercel, like we have really found a like home run solution for searching documentation. Someone was asking today in the tax community, like, what are the solutions that are actually working so that I can easily deploy the ability to search my documentation? Like, I think folks are underestimating the example that I like is from the moment that we conceived the self-driving car that leveraged deep learning and neural nets was possible to Waymo, which is goated, and I use it like every day. So from the moment that we got excited to 95% that a Waymo can drive in Arizona, that was pretty quick. From in like controlled environments and whatever, to actually get it to work here in SF. I remember when it took you to North Beach and like we hit every single possible edge case. This is the best city for that, right? Like we have and now everything is like curated and normal around these blocks, but we have every possible adversarial situation in the world, right, in this city. And every single one of those happened. So that last 5% is what makes me very bullish that the general purpose, oh, here's a chat app that does absolutely everything, is not the way to go. And entrepreneurs are going to tackle more specific verticals, and they're going to have a lot of challenges solving that last 5%. They're going to find security problems, edge cases, mitigations for hallucination, hybrid software 1.0 and software 2.0 techniques to overcome those, custom UI on top of the streaming text so that things are not just text, because that's not how we use computers. And that last 5% is where a lot of the value will accrue because it's really freaking hard. And that's what creates this complete product that you can actually ship to large numbers of people. And there are not a lot of those. And the ones that are there are extremely successful businesses.
And some of those will be running Vercel.
99.99% of those.
Guillermo, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, your experiences, and your predictions with us on audio and talk show style. Have you shift to the left of the couch? I'm going to call up our friend Ryan Blue, founder of Tabular, creator of Apache Iceberg. All right, thanks for coming. And hopefully this wonderful way here. So we've been talking about the world of aspiration.
Do I need instruction on the line? Can you hear me?
So you usually want to press it down. Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to touch.
Oh, really? Can I? Oh, I guess I've been pressing it on the side that I could just. Ryan, first of all, how did I convince you to come here tonight? Well, I think we certainly had crossed paths back in your Netflix days. I was aware of your team working on some of the most serverful, I guess I would say, and scalable architecture on the planet. If any of us enjoy the fruits of your labor every night when we watch movies on our iPads. I would like to start with, for those who don't know, not everyone here has been reading up on Tabular Vision. Tell us a bit about Apache Iceberg, Tabular, and the vision for the, complement, the stateful, durable storage complement to everything that's being built at Vercel.
Yeah, I think that, we started with the open source project, which is Apache Iceberg. And essentially, we wanted to fix the data lake world. We had all of these problems that were really stemming from the fact that none of us, and I say us because I was at Cloudera at the time, knew what we were doing in the database world when we started building these distributed systems that would eventually become real databases, or thought of as real databases. And we learned a lot, and we wanted to essentially fix that and bring the guarantees of the database back to the data lake space. It's funny because as you guys were talking about like AI and everything, I was like, I've been trying to get people to 1992 forever. So, we basically built the guarantees and SQL behavior of real data warehouses into the data lake stack. And then we sort of went, oh, wait, that's actually really important. We inadvertently solved this challenge of sharing database tables underneath large-scale databases, which, I guess hadn't been done. We'd been sharing data, but no one took it seriously because it had terrible performance and terrible side effects, and you couldn't, rename a column safely and things like that. But it's once we actually applied and stole a lot of ideas from the database world, we came up with something really special, which is that Databricks and Snowflake can actually work at the same time on the same data sets.
So let's talk about that for a moment. Databricks and Snowflake, these are kind of the, it's like the, I know Biggie, Tupac, West Coast, East Coast. This I think is the defining rivalry right now of the data infrastructure space. You and I talked when we spoke a couple of weeks ago about how there's in theory, they should be very reluctant to work with an open standard because if I'm Snowflake, why would I want like that ever to be the parameter of the Snowflake service? And likewise, if I'm Databricks, why would I ever want it to leave the confines of Delta Lake? I guess two-part question. One is, why are they embracing Apache Iceberg as a standard? And what do you predict is sort of the end game here?
So yeah, you're right. They have this. The business model of the database in for the last 30 years is to basically sit on your data. You put your data into this database, and they lease it back to you as long as you're paying bills. That's completely flipped with a shared storage model where you control the data and you let vendors talk to it. So I don't think that there is actually I don't think that database vendors are really happy about this situation, but they're following the data where it is. So, if you want access to run compute workloads on someone's data, you sort of have to build these tools and go there. So I think that, in the end, what we're moving towards is this sort of independent data layer where you let the vendors in. And everyone wants to play in that space if they can, because they have to have access to your data.
So one question would be, which I think I was talking some about Tabular recently, what is going to stop Tabular from going down the... By the way, is that feedback from me or is it from you? I don't know. It's from me. Okay, good. I heard someone here is the EV expert. What's to stop Tabular from just building ultimately a database? I mean, if Tabular is providing the consistency, the table schemas, the lineage, what's to stop Tabular from not just going up a layer and actually providing compute in addition to this storage layer?
Well, I think the temptation is there because compute is the lucrative part of this. So for anyone who doesn't know, I sort of skirted your question earlier about what is Tabular. Tabular is building on Apache Iceberg to build that lower shared storage layer and to think through what do we need to do in order to share storage underneath these databases. Well, it turns out we need to move security from the query layer down into the storage layer so that no matter what accesses the data, you get the same access controls. So we're building that system and trying to make it so that you can use your data in any of the tools that you want, including Databricks and Snowflake and all of the AWS tools like Athena and EMR. Like, if you want to use your data with it, it should be secure and you should be able to do that. So yeah, I mean, I think that to answer your latest question, it's tempting to provide compute, but our business model is built around making sure that you can use your data however you want to. We want to make sure that we're still aligned with the incentives, because the incentive structure where you put your data in Snowflake and if you misconfigure it, you might have that higher Snowflake bill. We want to be the provider that you trust to be pointing things out and say, hey, we can recluster that and you're going to save $5 million. So, we think that setting that alignment of incentives is more important than winning those compute workloads. But hey, we haven't pivoted yet.
Hopefully this will not be recorded and instead to the Databricks. We do have a Databricks executive here, so we'll strike that from the record. This is the off the record conversation. Let me ask a question. So we did talk, of course, about Snowflake, Databricks. Those are the behemoths on the space. But many of us who are playing in the data world have been paying a lot of attention to things like DuckDB. And then, just as soon as we get working with DuckDB, you've got folks who are working on, these days everything has got to be Rust, right? The Polars project is doing, we've got the rough, the folks who are rewriting Python to be more performant. And at the Pythonese designer, what are you seeing in terms of the heterogeneity of compute that people are running on top of Iceberg? Even if Tabular doesn't move in that direction, what are the alternatives in terms of next generation infrastructure, that compute infrastructure that you see data teams and data engineering teams running at scale?
So I definitely see a lot of interest in basically in C++, Rust, and other non-JVM frameworks. Those are seeing a ton of contributions these days. But we still, in at least our sort of enterprise customer space, we still see a lot of the traditional ones. I'm really excited about the move to basically make it more flexible. Whether you want to use DuckDB and do everything on a single node and really, really fast, or if you do need those big compute workloads, we want that mobility primarily, so that you can use whatever tool is right for the job and not be, stuck, pulled by your data into one tool or another.
Is there a way for us to run Iceberg locally?
Oh yeah, of course. Iceberg scales from very, very tiny all the way.
All right, I'm going to shift to questions. I'm going to actually put Guillermo on the spot. Then we're going to open up a Q&A. And then I'm going to give Ash the same question, Maya, which is, we have a lot of founders here. And so while we're talking, tech, infrastructure, philosophies of open source, one of the things that I always find most valuable talking to founders who've been through the gauntlet is advice if I were starting over. So Guillermo, you've been at it for a while now. What would be a couple pieces of advice for some of the folks who are just starting? I met a few people on the way in here who just got their first seed check. They're at the beginning of their journey. And maybe I'll give a quote, which is that people have seen on Twitter, we do these things not because we thought, because they were easy, but because we thought they would be easy. We know that the NVIDIA CEO recently said he would not have started a company if he had known. But anyway, that's an open question. Advice for these early stage founders here.
We were just talking about this earlier. I think if you're building infrastructure, you have to be aware that it's a multi-year journey and it's really, really, really difficult. I actually think that because we can't always perfectly visualize these systems as monumentally obvious as they actually become. Like, I'm kind of obsessed right now. I'm having a phase with the Vegas sphere. It's like you look at it and say, oh, it's freaking huge. Like, it must have taken all this money and time and power. And look at how bright it is. Infrastructure is a lot like that. But it's just not obvious. You don't see it. So I think this is similar to the Jensen advice of it's very difficult and you have to have this multi-year, very long-term vision. The thing that's also very difficult, but is the flip side and is very necessary, is you have to incrementally deliver value. Open source is a great way of incrementally delivering value. You're incrementally delivering value to a huge set of stakeholders. We spent years working on XJS, fixing issues, prioritizing issues that were coming from larger companies. Even if we weren't sure that those companies were going to be immediately our customers, but it was a way of incrementally delivering value, knowing that you have this very difficult catch-22 type of problem where you have to build up this huge structure, and at the same time you have to point to it and be look, it's going up. And I think for us, open source was that tool.
That's great. Same question for Ryan. I'm going to be more specific, which is a lot of people talk about open source communities. What lessons have you taken in terms of commercializing an open source project and advice for other founders? Again, we've got open source founders out here trying to go to market. What have you learned as you've gone from Apache Iceberg to a commercial company, Tabular, that is promoting that? Of course, Guillermo, I'm sure has thoughts on this, but I'd start with Ryan.
I think I came to it with a lot of opinions about this because I'd seen it go wrong. And I think really just be honest with your community. Talk about the things that are important to you and still value the things that are important to them. They're a huge asset, and open source works on, human capital, the relationships, the trust, and you cannot lose the trust with your community. If you do, you're just, I don't know what you do. So it's an enormous benefit, but you have to treat them with respect and just be honest. Where we have conflicts of interest, we talk to the community about it. We're hey, we actually sell this thing, but we don't, I guess we don't actually have a conflict of interest there because we actually use a lot of the open source directly and contribute it back. So that's a bad example. But, where we do, we're saying like, we don't think that this is part of the project, but we have a conflict of interest.
Okay, I'm going to ask the last question for Guillermo about managing open source communities.
The beauty of open source is that it's a constant stream of feedback. So for me, it's just all about engaging with that feedback, seeking it out. One flip side of that really quick is that there are a lot of passive users of open source and a lot of very vocal, I react to every GitHub issue with 5 reactions kind of users, and you have to be aware that both exist. It's amazing, like the other day I heard one of the top 3 largest banks in the world is like massively embracing Next.js. They've never reached out to us until the very end of the project. Oh, by the way, on Monday it's going live. And of course, like this is the beauty of open source, you do whatever the heck you want. But I was like, wow, it's amazing how self-serve this thing. It's like you can just like you figure it out with Copilot or like ChatGPT, and yeah, it's amazing. So not over-indexing too much on any particular source of feedback, but there's just tons and just I think acting very transparently and with my background in real time whenever possible. Whether it's that the Next.js template doesn't have the right height for mobile devices, or there's opportunities to improve documentation. There's just constant opportunities for feedback, and I think shipping in real time. I think what X is doing in terms of the sort of open source dialogue there is also really interesting. Like we can receive feedback and act on it really fast and like make huge numbers of people really happy, and sometimes it's a small thing. So feedback to me is king, and that's the essence of open source.
I do notice that you're quite active on Twitter and something like engaging with that community, which is sometimes quite vocal and can be quite critical. So I think I've noticed keeping a very calm demeanor is critical. People really go for blood sometimes. Okay, so I do have some questions here from the field. So first question, it's going to go to Ryan because that's how it works here. So Ryan, what was a strongly held belief? This is philosophical. What was a strongly held belief? It could be about technology or startups and serverless infrastructure. Strongly held belief that you changed your mind on. What was something that you learned that surprised you on the journey with Tabular?
I'm a little unprepared for that. So I think one of the things that we learned early on was, we thought, hey, we're going to build data security layer. Like that sounds hard. And we realized very quickly that this was a very critical piece because no one was going to trust the startup when the security person comes into the room and they're like, no, you want us to just open up the data lake to these people? No. So that was one thing where we really didn't think that we would be going on a multi-month project to figure out, how we're going to do this and really design it properly. A little stressful to do it right on the runway we had, but I'm very glad that we did.
That's what the market is for, is to change your mind on things. Same question to Guillermo.
I think for me, the biggest change, I would say I had a strong belief that a general purpose tool was going to be very useful at the way for us to win the market. And one of the things you asked earlier was what were the inflection points in growth? I think when we narrowed focus and attach ourselves to some very well understandable ways. So obviously TypeScript was on the rise, obviously React was on the rise. I'd rather do an amazing job or try to do an amazing job for 100 people to love me than having 100,000 people that kind of like me. And that kind of has become for me a mantra and recommend it to everybody. But that was not very obvious in the beginning. And I think as a founder, you're always I need to make everybody the happiest. And in that process, you make everyone gotta mediocre happy. So focusing and then expanding from there.
I think Frank Slippen in a book that came out called Amp It Up, Snowflake, and his quote was, now with the focus, increase the velocity. So it very much echoes that. Okay, we're almost at time here. It's almost 7 o'clock, and I do want to make sure we have time for mingling. I also want to respect the time of our panelists. I am going to, in the last 4 minutes, provide a quick word from the sponsor, Bill Data. Frankly, I will say Guillermo did probably a better job than I could. We're not here to, I think, we're not really here to pitch any of our businesses. The goal here is to share wisdom thoughts with founders. But since we've had this banner ad up behind us the entire time, I will just say that Rill certainly is a beneficiary of the work that folks like White have been doing on data infrastructure. We're leaning heavily into the world that you're building with data lakes, as well that Guillermo and Vercel have been inspiration for our BI as code approach to the world. So I'm not going to do a 5-minute demo, but I would ask all of you in exchange for spending time here tonight and having a few drinks, please do go check out Rill and our operational business intelligence tool. Whatever Guillermo said, we're going to put that on our webpage as our new tagline. And most importantly, I want to thank our guests here and thank all of you for coming to an in-person event here at the X headquarters. And I hope you all get a chance to chat with each other. This is what the in-person events are about. So thanks again, Guillermo. Thank you, Ryan. And look forward to having you.